All right, so quick lecture for you on antisocial personality disorder. This is the second of two personality disorders I'm going to talk about. Last time we talked about generally what personality is and how disorders are thought of and the different clusters, A, B, and C and stuff, and we zoomed in on borderline personality disorder. Now we're going to zoom in on one more real quick just for about 10 minutes or less. Might even try and burn through this in 5 minutes. But this is antisocial personality disorder, another good one to know about. So what the disorder is defined as a pervasive pattern of disregard for the rights of others, including violating other people's rights since you're 15 years old. So it's something, it's an interesting one because it has to start fairly young. But you have to have 3 or more symptoms of the following list, which I'll get into, and you have to be at least 18 years old to have this. But there's basically 3 categories of symptoms. Remember in BPD, there were 4 categories. There were all 4 different sorts of instability. Here we have 3 different categories, including social and legal norms, like doing stuff that gets you arrested, lying, being irresponsible. Impulsivity is the second category, like failing to plan ahead or being impulsive or being irritable and aggressive. And the last one is callous and unemotional, which is, just disregard for the safety of others or even of yourself, and then lack of remorse. If you do something wrong to someone else, you don't seem to feel guilt. So that would be, you have to have 3 of those, 7 symptoms to have ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. And there's a lot of overlap with this and just like getting arrested. Like a lot of the people that are in jail have this, because we're essentially defining a psychological disorder based on legal norms. I mean, look at the first symptom is performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So that's one symptom right there. All you need is to be deceitful and irresponsible, and boom, you have ASPD, as long as it's a consistent pattern over a period of time and so forth. That's antisocial personality disorder. A related concept, which is different, I want to draw the distinction, is called psychopathy. And this is different than the name of the course. Here we have psychopathology. That's just something wrong with your psyche, with your mind, with your soul. Psychopathology. This is psychopathy, which looks very similar. I think it has like 1 less syllable. But this is a set of personality traits that are really overlap a lot with antisocial personality disorder. I don't think the term "you are a psychopath," sometimes people say that, but psychopathy is the set of personality traits that are very high in people that would be, defined as a quote-unquote psychopath, such as Hannibal Lecter here. So here are some of the personality traits that are involved in psychopathy. One is superficial charm or glibness. That is not part of antisocial personality disorder, but it is part of psychopathy. Grandiosity, you know what that is from your study of psychosis. Tendency towards boredom and need for stimulation. Pathological lying, cunning and manipulation of others, and then lack of remorse. So you can see some overlap, like the lack of remorse, with antisocial personality disorder, but it is different. So if, everybody, we're all on the spectrum somewhere in terms of how much we have these things. I believe there's a researcher named Cleckley who came up with this questionnaire that is essentially rates these different things, and you can see how high you are if you want to look that up. Google it. Here's more psychopath. Famous, serial killers you've heard of. Going back to the disorder, antisocial personality disorder, lifetime prevalence is about 4%. The main thing I want you to understand here is that, this is how prevalent antisocial behavior is. Look at around age 18. 60% of males around age 18 engage in antisocial behavior in some way, whether it be lying or doing impulsive things or breaking the law. Probably not 60% break the law, but they do something that is in that domain of antisocial behavior. So it kind of peaks at around age 18. And then after that, people kind of kind of like with borderline personality disorder. They mellow out, as they approach age 30 and stuff, and that becomes less and less common. The people that have antisocial personality disorder tend to begin those behaviors younger, and then they persist after the peak for everybody else. So other people it happens when you're a late teenager and stuff, and then it goes away. People that are going to be diagnosed with this and end up maybe in prison and so forth, antisocial personality disorder, they have, it begins earlier and might not end at all. So what causes this? Well, there's a variety of factors to consider, but I want us to consider genetic biological contribution first. So let's look at twin studies. And there's a relationship. So there's 50% concordance with monozygotic twins, 20% for dizygotic. So that would tend to make you think that there's having the same genes as someone is determining quite a bit whether you go together in terms of both having ASPD or not. And we've seen that in many disorders. Stronger relationship. Okay, so this is interesting. There's a stronger relationship between, so let's think of kids that are adopted. Okay, this happens a lot. Sons are adopted sometimes because their dad went to jail. So there's a stronger relationship between the criminal records of adopted sons and their biological fathers than there is between adopted sons and their adoptive fathers. Okay, so if the biological, well, you know what? Yeah, okay, well, we can look at this real quick. So if the biological father is convicted, that there is a higher rate of the son being convicted if the biological father is convicted. If the adopted father is also convicted, there's a very high rate. But even if the adopted father is not convicted, the son still has a 20% rate of being convicted himself if his father is convicted. Now, if the biological father is not convicted, it matters not what the adopted father does. There's still only a 10% chance, either way, of the son being convicted if the biological father is not convicted. So here, the biological father not convicted, we have a low rate. Here, the biological father convicted, we have a high rate, and even higher rate if the adopted father is also convicted. So they both matter, but it seems like something about having your biology come from someone who's convicted of a crime really puts you at risk of being convicted of a crime yourself. Now you may say to yourself, Professor Norton, you goofball, you just said puts you at risk for committing a crime. Who's the victim here? You're not at risk for committing a crime. You're putting other people at risk by the crime you committed. People have free will. They can commit crimes or not. Well, I might try to convince you that that's not true in the next slide here. So I'm actually going to use a study by Avshalom Caspi, who is, you may remember, I certainly hope you do remember, from the depression study that we went over, that proved to be false. But he looked at the interaction between genes and stressful life events, trying to understand the notion of the bucket, the stress diathesis hypothesis, kind of having a specific incarnation of that. So that study was false, but he did another study, very, very similar to the one he did on depression, in antisocial personality disorder. And so let's get oriented with what that study looked like. So it's a very similar design. And he's going to look at a gene and he's going to look at an environmental construct and see how they interact. The gene in this case is not the 5-HTP gene. It's called the MAOA gene. And this is a gene that has been linked into aggression in mice. It's called the warrior gene. So mice with a certain version of this gene are very aggressive. It's also linked to antisocial behavior in humans, in rare individuals who are missing this gene. So something about antisocial behavior or aggressive behavior is going on with this gene. And he wants to look at how that gene interacts with environmental stuff. So the construct of interest here in terms of the environment is childhood maltreatment. We know that children who are maltreated are more likely to engage in aggressive acts themselves when they're adults and engage in antisocial behavior. So this is analogous to stress in the first Caspi study. We know stress is linked to depression. We know childhood maltreatment is linked to antisocial behavior. So let's look at the results. Okay. Kind of should remind you of the first Caspi study. We see this these two lines with two different slopes. In the first CASP study, there were 3 lines, but here there are 2. And we see the people with high MAOA activity. Let's look at this gray line first. There's 280 of them. And look at them. The line goes up if they have none to probable to severe childhood maltreatment. So if they definitely had severe childhood maltreatment, they have a lot of antisocial behavior. If they have no childhood maltreatment, they have low antisocial behavior. So that's the deal with these high MAOA activity people. People with low MAO activity, people with low MAO activity have the same trend, but it's much steeper. So there's a ton of antisocial behavior in those people who have been maltreated and have this bad version of the gene, basically. There's a little bit more in those that have the bad version of the gene and probable childhood maltreatment, and I would say this is kind of a wash here. I wouldn't make too much of a difference here. Maybe even for here, not too much of a difference. Again, there's no error bars. I don't really trust this graph. But this is a very compelling, interesting trend. Just like the first GASP study was, right? We were very compelled by that for a little while until I told you it was false. The difference is this study is true. It has been replicated by other researchers. So the original CASP study is showing an effect over here, and all these other studies are showing a similar effect. Don't worry about what this actually means. It's a p-value, basically, how statistically significant the difference is or whatever. And there's a couple studies that found something different, but overall the thrust of the data suggests that this study is true. So what does that mean? Okay, it means that antisocial behavior is being determined in part by what genes you have, and the other thing is whether you were maltreated as a child. So, do you really think that this behavior, this antisocial behavior, is something that you can say, oh, this is your fault, don't do it, when the data are suggesting that genes, which are totally beyond someone's control, and childhood maltreatment, which is beyond your control, are causing you to do this thing, to doing this antisocial behavior. So I think this is something that makes me, it helps me to have compassion on people that are in jail, or they do antisocial things. I might look at them at first and say, man, how could you do something like that? But probably there's some combination of stuff that's outside that person's control that contributed to them doing it. Of course, they do have free will, and they could have not done it, and they should have not done it. But if I had their genes and I had their life experiences, I might have done it too. I probably would have. So this is something that helps me to have compassion on people and not judge people for doing bad things. I think that's where we're going to stop with antisocial personality disorder.